Sarah Bivens.
And I'm Matthew Bivens.
We had a home birth back in 2016.
So we started a podcast about it.
And then grew it into a birth brand to help future and current parents believe in their success with home birth.
This is the place to hear home birth stories along with helpful resources and tips to feel empowered and supported in your birth journey.
This is Doing It at Home. Welcome back to Doing It at Home, the place for you to feel confident, prepared, and excited for home birth. I'm Sarah. Today's episode is choosing home birth as an evidence-based minded person, plus letting go, accepting pain, and being patient with Shira Page. Thank you again for listening, for tuning in, for finding us however you did. We really appreciate you, and we're so excited to have you here. Quick reminder, hit subscribe on whatever device you are listening with right now. Today's episode, couple of key topics, things that we highlight. We talk about Leche League. We talk about business of being born. We talk about a co-care model. We talk about Bradley method, hospital transfer, mental preparation, prodromal labor, postpartum trauma and anxiety, as well as placenta removal. Quick word from our sponsor, and then we will hear Shira's story. Hi, Shira. Welcome. How are you?
I am good, thanks. How are you guys?
Wonderful.
Yes.
Awesome.
We're doing fantastic.
All of the things, all of the adjectives.
Yeah. Thank you so much
great.
for joining us today, Shira. We're really excited about this conversation.
Of course, so am I. I have been listening to this podcast for over almost 4 years. So this is very exciting for me.
Wow.
Considering it's been around for 5, that's most of them. So yeah, you've been around.
Like an OG.
Been around a minute. That's great. Well, will you share a little bit about yourself and your family with us?
Yeah, of course. My name is Shira, and I live outside of Boston in a suburb. We just moved from Cambridge, which is a small city next to Boston, to the suburbs, which is a very new experience. And I live with my husband, Nick, and my 2 daughters. Rowan is almost 3. She is my first. And then we have a baby, Maeve, who is going to be 6 months in 2 weeks. I am a nurse practitioner by training. So I went to nursing and NP school. I worked clinically for a while, but I'm currently not in clinical practice. I am a medical director working in medical education. It's a very different thing than being a clinical NP. And then I also have a very small lactation practice on the side. So working with parents and babies around feeding.
What inspired you to start the lactation practice?
I grew up kind of with breastfeeding being a big part of my life. My mom was a Leche League leader, so that's a volunteer-based organization that helps parents with feeding. And then my own experience with my first was just a really beautiful breastfeeding relationship. Also somewhat, there were normal struggles, but it was pretty straightforward. So I started this practice, and then I had my second, and I had a very different breastfeeding experience. So that kind of has inspired me to go more into lactation and get additional education so that I can help parents that are having really complex issues.
Wow, that's wonderful as you're out there doing that type of work. And will you share the name of your practice?
Yeah, it's called dyad support. So a dyad is like the mother-baby dyad. So the idea is that I'm really there to support both of the individuals in that picture. It's not just about getting the baby fed, so that the parents feel supported and educated and happy with the way their journey goes.
Oh, that's awesome.
Really great. And we'll include links to that in the show notes for anyone listening or watching right now and wants to connect and could use that extra support, because I love how you mentioned that it's multiple humans are involved in the experience. And so I think there is a lot of focus on just making sure the baby gets fed, but at what cost? There's a maker of the milk that feeds the baby. And so how can they feel best? So I love that. Yeah, we'll definitely include all the ways that you can learn more about Shira and her practice. So let's talk a little bit about how home birth came into the mix for you. Was that something you knew you wanted to do, or did something present itself and then you switched gears? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, I kind of always knew that I wanted to pursue home birth. My youngest brother was born at home, so I had that aspect that I kind of grew up thinking it was normal. My mom was a little crunchy, so that definitely influenced my upbringing and perspective. And then, a few years before having children, I think like many people, I watched The Business of Being Born, and that kind of reiterated everything for me. A couple other home birth documentaries. And then also being a medical professional, I did a clinical rotation in labor and delivery. I've worked in hospitals, and just kind of having the perspective of knowing what actually goes on behind the scenes in the healthcare establishment. And, I think some people worship healthcare and they see it as the be all end all, and that it's this system that is always bringing the best quality of care and it's there to save you. And being on the other end of that, I just kind of had this pulling off the mask of the healthcare institution and of hospitals. And I don't feel safe in a lot of healthcare settings. I'm very skeptical of a lot of my interactions with providers and their education or the attention that you're getting as a patient. So for me, I was definitely had some fear around the idea of being in a hospital setting, and anything I could do to not bring a normal, healthy pregnancy into that space, I was determined to do. So it's kind of a no-brainer for me in a lot of ways. I didn't really struggle with the decision. I just, when I got pregnant, started looking at home birth midwives and moving forward. We also, in the Boston area, there are some very well-established home birth midwifery practices. Home birth is somewhat more supported in the laws than it is in some other states. So it's not illegal. You don't have to jump through hoops to make it happen. And the home birth providers in the area are also pretty well respected in a lot of the hospitals. So it wasn't this big rebellious choice against the system either.
Got it.
Yeah. So you could have your reservations around certain aspects of it, and yet it sounds like you can have a home birth experience in that area, and there can be collaboration, or there can be kind of more understanding in terms of the variation of options. So I like that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, with both my births, I did something that's informally called co-care with local hospital midwives. So that is that I did all my routine care through them. So I did get routine ultrasounds and blood tests. I went to them for about 6 visits through each pregnancy. And the idea around that is that if I transferred into the hospital, which you will see that I did with my first birth, that I can transfer into midwifery care, and that they know me, they have my chart. It just makes things go a lot smoother, rather than being transferred into physician practice. Is this who is this person who hasn't gotten any care? There being a little bit more friction potentially.
Yeah.
So did your midwife have a relationship with the hospital and the midwives in that hospital? Is that how it worked?
That it's not a formal relationship. So they're very adamant at the hospital that I worked with that they are not backup care. They just kind of say we're here to support you if you change your mind.
Got it.
But informally, one of my home birth midwives also works as a doula. She'd been a doula for a number of the midwives at the hospital. She's close friends with many of them. So there's a level of respect there that I think doesn't always happen in these situations.
Clear. Okay.
So how was Nick? This is usually where you pop in, but
I was pausing. I was waiting. I was waiting for my entrance. Yes. How was Nick? How was your husband with the whole conversation around home birth?
He's a pretty easygoing guy, and I think he has no healthcare background, so he's a graphic designer and artist. So with this sort of stuff, he's kind of like, well, I guess you're the expert, like whatever you want to do.
Yes.
We did Bradley, so that is a kind of partner-based, very intensive birth education program, and I think that that was really helpful for him because it just walks through every little detail about birth. It kind of is like focused on interventionless birth. Mm-hmm. So I think it really helped him see the benefit to being outside of the hospital as well. And so he was very much on board. We didn't really have any issues around that. Interestingly, I think the second birth was harder for him because I'll talk about we transferred with my first. So he kind of had the experience of laboring at home and then had the experience of being in the hospital and having that postpartum support in the hospital. So I think with the second birth, he was actually more nervous because he, A, knew what birth was actually like, and B, had seen the kind of relief that comes with having all these providers around you supporting you in a hospital setting, I think for him at least. And it was a little scary to be like, oh, so we're just going to be like home with the baby afterwards. Okay. So that was kind of a surprise to me that, the second time he was voicing some concerns, whereas the first time he'd been like, yeah, it's fine.
Got it. All right.
Well, why don't we take a quick break? And when we come back, we can go through some of the details of your births.
Great.
Let's talk about your birth with Rowan and kind of in preparation for that, how you were feeling, and then some of the details of that, and then how that may have influenced the second birth.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, we did this Bradley program. So that is, I don't know if they're all like this, but at least the one that we did was 12 weeks. Every week, like a 2 to 3.5 hour class.
Oh, wow.
So as birth prep goes, it's pretty intensive. On top of that, I felt like I'd been kind of like a birth nerd my whole life and just like watched every birth documentary and every birth video and read all the books. So I had a little bit of a newbie like confidence about the situation. So I felt pretty good going into it. I had a fairly uneventful pregnancy. Things just got a little challenging towards the end. Around 36 weeks, I started having prodromal labor pretty much every night. So I would like go to sleep, wake up around midnight with, what felt like contractions to me. And that would go on and off throughout the course of the night. And then by the morning, they'd be gone. So that was exhausting. I was working full time as a clinical NP at the time. And around 2 weeks before my due date, I was just like, I think I need to end early. Like, I just need to have some time to sleep and prepare. I was really focused on being like physically prepared for the birth. And so the idea that I was just going to be like totally sleep deprived going into this really intense stamina-based event was stressful to me. I was like, how am I going to labor if I am so sleep deprived and have been up every night for weeks and weeks and weeks? So that was a really good decision for me. I was very privileged to be able to do that. So I took those 2 weeks to just like rest, watch TV, hang out. Now that we have kids, I am so grateful that I took that time to just chill. Like, I wish that everyone could do that because it was some of the last long stretches of alone time I would have. Mm-hmm. So I was feeling like pretty good going into it. I got a little antsy, like most people do, towards approaching the due date. Like, when is this going to happen? I feel so ready. And then just feeding into my neuroses about that, I did happen to go into labor on my actual due date, which I know is pretty rare. Mm-hmm. So I'd been having these like false labor kind of stuff going on for a while. The day before my due date, I had a massage scheduled with a induction massage specialist. So there's a local woman who does these things called induction massages, which are like focused on trigger points and relaxation. So I went to that massage and I actually had a contraction on the table and I was like, whoa, this is different than what I've been having.
Wow.
And I drove home and like, I remember being in the car being like, whoa, these are like, I don't know if I can keep driving kind of feeling. That's very different than all this false labor. And, you know, I went home and had a relaxing evening and had all the intentions of sleeping and resting. That has been really emphasized to me. Like when you go into early labor, the most important thing to do is sleep. And like a lot of first time moms, I think that I was just like way too excited that I was in labor, and I took a bath, I got in bed, and I just like could not sleep. I just kind of was hanging around. Like I would get up and get in the bath, I would drink water, I would like roll around in bed. So I didn't end up sleeping. At around like 1 a.m. or something, I woke up my husband because the contractions felt like they were somewhat unmanageable. And then we basically just like stayed up all night watching TV, which I think was the first, if I could go back and redo that birth, like that's one of the first things I would change. I think I should have done everything in my power to get sleep. Okay. But I think we were just excited, and it was hard to know, like, you know, I think I had this holding out hope for this idea that I would have like some sort of a 4-hour labor and it would just progress really quickly, which it did not. So, you know, we stayed up all night with these kind of like mild early labor contractions. And then we called the midwife, like, I think around 4 a.m. or so. And I remember very specifically on the phone with her, the contractions just like stopped the whole time. Something about like the anxiety of having this external perspective on what was going on with me made them stop. So she was like, yeah, I think it's early labor. Like maybe call me back in the morning. And we left a few more hours go on. It was a little bit confusing for me and for Nick, because in Bradley, they really focus like on the progression of labor, knowing the stages of labor. And it's kind of very, not necessarily linear, but like they group certain behaviors into the different stages. And for me, those early 8 hours or so were a little confusing because my contractions were kind of all over the place. It was hard to tell, like they'd be 3 minutes, 4 minutes, then they'd be 10 minutes. I had a lot of intense back pain. I was not able to move or get comfortable. I was vomiting. So I think that confusion about like, this isn't anything that they told me about made me want to have the midwife there. So we had them come like right away in the early morning. And pretty soon into being with us, they explained that based on the amount of back pain that I was having and the way my contractions were, that the baby was probably posterior. So that her, you know, she was facing sunny side up. And so we basically just spent that entire day doing positional stuff to try to get her to flip. Because I'm sure, as you guys know, like that posterior position causes a lot of back pain and it can cause labor to not really progress.
So again, that position is baby's head's down, but their face is like facing your belly button. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's considered like a malposition or not ideal for birth. So we did like every single thing that day. We did the lunges. We did the rebozo blanket, if you've seen that. Like they kind of shake the belly. We tried to do a lot of walking. It was really like, I remember not being able to like sit on the toilet. I couldn't stand. I could pretty much only be in this position that was like a child's pose. that was the only position I had any relief in. And there wasn't even a break between contractions. So it just was like this constant back pain. Yeah. I remember telling one of the midwives that I felt like I was like, someone was like stabbing my spine. They're really, really unpleasant. I think we got to the evening and the midwives, who don't usually check, they don't like usually do cervical checks, we're like, well, why don't we just see where you are so we can come up with some next steps, and we won't tell you. So they checked me, and they didn't tell me the exact amount. I know from looking at the charting that it was 2 centimeters, but I could tell at the time just by their like body language, and they kind of said like, I think we should really prioritize rest. So I knew that like I wasn't 10 centimeters.
Like, oh man, they're telling me to rest.
Yeah.
That means we're going to be here a minute.
How were you feeling emotionally at that point? Kind of understanding, getting a sense of where it was by that point.
Yeah, I think I felt very trapped. Like, this is not what this isn't what I prepared for. I'm confused how to use any of the like coping skills that I thought I spent time on. I'm confused why like I'm not having rest between contractions. Like, I just felt like I was trapped in pain. And I think that also perpetuated a fear cycle for me. And I just was like, the hardest thing was that I couldn't rest. Yeah. You hear sometimes people are able to have these labors where you have very intense contractions, but then you rest in between them. And that's what really keeps people going. And I was completely unable to rest in any way. I remember also saying like, I just want to be able to lie down. Like I couldn't lie down. I couldn't lie down on my side. I couldn't do anything. So they were trying to do as much as possible to get this position to change. We actually had a chiropractor who I never worked with before. They just called a bunch of chiropractors. We had a chiropractor come to the house and adjust me. And she was like, yeah, I think your hips are a little bit uneven. And that's like causing the baby to be stuck in this position. I think they suggested having an acupuncturist come. And at that point I was like, I just can't have like another thing I can't do another thing that's not going to work.
Yeah.
So they talked about rest. At this point I was going on 36 hours without sleeping. And they were like, you could take Benadryl, you could have a glass of wine. I was like, this level of pain is I'm not sleeping with a Benadryl.
Yeah.
So what we decided to do was to go to the hospital, not to transfer, but to go in for what's called therapeutic rest, or I think like in the old days, they used to call it morphine sleep. So it's basically designed for women who are having a lot of prodromal labor that's preventing them from sleeping. And you go in and they give you an injection of morphine, and the idea is that you sleep and get some break, and then you can like go back to being at home. So it's even used for people who are planning to give birth in the hospital, but like not ready to be admitted.
That's interesting. Wow.
So that was helpful. I mean, it was relaxing in that I was kind of able to like lay down, to eat something, which I haven't been able to do. I wouldn't say that it actually helps me sleep because, everyone responds to morphine differently, but to me, I just basically felt like I was extremely high, but also very much awake. So I was basically just like, all right, I can relax, but I didn't necessarily get a ton more sleep. My contractions did definitely slow in response to the morphine. And then, we woke up the next morning and I thought we'd just wake up, have breakfast, and like go back home. And of course, this was kind of where the hospital providers were like, hey, so you sure you don't want to stay?
Got it.
I had to do, I'm not sure if it was actually a stress test or just like some intensive fetal monitoring before they would let me go home. And that was really hard because the morphine was wearing off. My contractions were kind of starting to pick up again. I was forced to like lay down and be monitored. I felt, I'm sure they were very nice, but at the time I was just in a very sensitive place emotionally. And I felt like the midwives were, the hospital midwives were a little bit like, kept like goading me on to be like, yeah, like we'll help you, stay with us. So that was kind of frustrating. We didn't ended up actually getting back home until 1. And then we tried to do walking and eating, and our Bradley teacher was actually the midwifery student for my home birth midwife. So she came over and did like kind of like a positional boot camp with us to try to get the baby to flip. It was just basically a repeat of the day before, trying everything. Nothing worked, still the same back pain. And I think around 6 that evening, I just like lost it. And I was like, there's no way I can do this another night. So we had, my midwives were very supportive. I don't think they would have ever suggested that we transfer because there wasn't a safety issue. But once I suggested that I wanted to transfer, they were like, yeah, I think that's the right decision. So that was really validating for me. So that evening, we went into the hospital. I got an epidural. And, I think my midwives were kind of thinking like, well, we've seen this happen a lot of times, and there's like a chance that probably this is going to end in a surgical birth just because it's been a long home birth and like you're exhausted. And the epidural was just wonders for my body in this scenario. I was exhausted. I think I just needed to get out of my head and rest. And shortly after getting the epidural, maybe a few hours in, there was like a deceleration. So they thought the baby's heart rate had dropped, and everyone came in this big panic, and she'd actually flipped. And I was 6 centimeters. So that was very positive, and really encouraging. And then, within a few hours without any Pitocin, I was able to progress to 9.5 centimeters. They came in and were like, you're almost there, but you have a bit of what they call a cervical lift. So there's like still some of the cervix over the baby's head. We can break your water for you, and that'll probably fix that. And at this point I was like, yeah, whatever, do whatever you want. I don't care. Let's just get this over with. So they did that. And then she was out in like 20 minutes. Pushing was, definitely physically challenging, especially with an epidural, but it was pretty short. And the one thing that I remember about the hospital is that, I started pushing it around 7 a.m., which is change of shift. So I remember just when they decided it was time for me to start pushing, I remember 2 nurses standing over me, like basically yelling at each other, shift handoff. And, all these people rush in for pushing. So it was a very stressful situation. And I was so grateful that like one of my home birth midwives came with me kind of to act as a doula in that situation. And she was the only one who's like, do you want me to explain pushing to you? And who was very, very supportive.
That's great.
I did, when Rowan was born, they put her on my chest, and then within like a millisecond, they were like, she's blue, she's not breathing, and they swept her away. And by the time they got her to the warmer, she was already crying. So I would say all in all, that birth, like I had a very positive experience, but I still had a bunch of touch points where I was like, this is not the way I wanted things to go. I kind of skimmed over them, but we had like a couple of fetal decelerations, and each time it was like the whole hospital team comes in. They are kind of like raging to go, do any intervention possible. And then it was always, oh, she just changed position, or like, oh, you just need to flip on your side. So the kind of trigger happy attitude about interventions was definitely present, and I was able to see that. And, I feel really lucky that I was able to avoid them. But generally it was like a pretty positive experience. And I didn't have a lot of sadness or remorse about not giving birth at home. Like it just felt right what had happened. And, but I was very excited to try again when I got pregnant with my second.
What was it like when you and Nick finally got home with the fresh baby.
Yeah, with
just
Rowan.
The two of you. Yeah, with Rowan.
It felt really nice to be home. I think that I think we stayed in the hospital 2 nights, and that support was helpful, especially as first-time parents. It did feel kind of like a safety net to just know someone's checking on your baby constantly, and there's a call bell, and that did help with some of our anxiety. But once we got home, it just felt like a sigh of relief. I do remember having, we came home and the midwives had very much cleaned up from the home birth, but I do remember getting home and having a little bit of a pang of oh my gosh, I have such negative associations with this space because I felt so trapped here. I had such a hard time for those 40 something hours that we were here. And that wore off pretty quickly, but that is something that I remember being hard.
Appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. That's something that I don't think we've heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense. You went through that experience in that space, and then you were gone for a couple of days, and then the return back into that space. I can imagine, almost going back into those emotions again.
Yeah, that's definitely something that others can relate to. I'm sure listening who have had a similar experience and maybe preparing for a future birth and maybe preparing for another home birth like you did. And so maybe there's some healing to be done, or some, reframing of the space if it's in the same house, or even if it's not in the same house, but it's, the same kind of setup. I really appreciate that perspective, because that's something very real that someone could identify with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely needed a good cleansing, or move furniture in a different way, something to just make it feel different.
Yeah. I also appreciate, Shira, I love how I can have deeper appreciation for birth as an experience and reverence for it. I don't think I've fully put myself in a space of empathy and understanding of someone pushing and having a vaginal birth with an epidural. I know it happens. I've heard of so many of them, but I don't think I really have stopped and thought about that until you described the challenge that one could have within that. I mean, you're still pushing a baby out, and yes, you might not be feeling the pain per se, air quotes, that someone unmedicated might be feeling, but yet you're trying to find muscles, especially as a first-time birther, and bring a baby out in a very interesting way. So it brings even a deeper level of perspective for me, and appreciation for any way you birth a baby is incredible. Any way you choose to do it, unmedicated vaginally, medicated vaginally, surgical birth, cesarean, any way is amazing, and our bodies are amazing. And those are very unique experiences that, depending on which one you can relate to or that you've had, it's an intense experience any way you look at it. And so I personally am walking away from this with a deeper sense of gratitude for every person who's ever birthed a baby, no matter what way you've done it. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you go into some details of your second, now having had a home birth where you stayed there the whole time? Did you stay there the whole time for the second birth?
Yeah.
Okay.
We did. Yeah. So my second is a pretty straightforward birth story. In terms of preparation, I had a really difficult pregnancy physically. I just, towards the middle of third trimester, I basically was not able to go on walks even. I just had such bad symphysis pubic pain and hip pain. So that was really hard for me. I'm a fairly active person, and I just felt like I had to throw the idea of physical preparation out the window. I would try to do stretches and stuff, but that was the most I could do. I really focused more on mental preparation, because I knew that I got in my head a lot with the first birth. And then I also, with this birth, I had that baggage of the first birth with me to kind of process. Yeah. I listened to someone talk about birth and talk about the idea of having onlookers, and how mammals birth in private. And and that birth flows when you have external people, and that same phenomena can be observed if you are like looking at yourself externally and kind of self-judging.
Oh, interesting.
Which for me, I'm a very like self-critical person who's constantly kind of looking at myself from the outside. So that really resonated with me. So I was trying to do work ahead of the birth to get out of that space, to not judge myself, to not kind of worry about what my providers thought of me, or how I was presenting myself to the midwife. So this birth, same thing, because I was working from home. I was like, oh yeah, I'll work up until I go to labor. And then like a week before, I was in a headspace where I was like physically uncomfortable. I wasn't sleeping. So I stopped working, decided to rest as much as you can with also having a toddler around. But, you know, I had the same like prodromal labor every night, much more intense than it had been with Rowan, but just like not sleeping, thinking I was always going into labor. And then, you know, I had this time, I think I was like 40 weeks, 2 days, where I just had a very different night. Like I could just tell that the contractions were slightly different. I had lost my mucus plug, which for both births was kind of a sign that like things were actually happening. And so the next day, we sent my toddler away to her grandparents, and we just did like a lot of walking, relaxing. I started having more frequent contractions. They were still pretty manageable. By the afternoon, they were starting to get less manageable. So I went from me kind of like listening to music and breathing to like kind of crying and moaning, to being like, I need someone else to be here other than just you, Nick. So we called the midwives probably around like 4. So I felt that my labor, like early labor, had probably started at midnight the night before, very slow. And then we called them at 4 p.m. the next day. So that's when things really started to pick up. The midwives came around 5. And by the way, this is the same birth team I worked with for both pregnancies. So they came around 5, and I got in the tub, which with my first birth had like done nothing for me. I got in, I was like, this isn't helping, I'm just overheated, and I got out. And for this birth, the tub felt like amazing and helped me breathe through contractions. You know, my contractions were so much more like, this is a contraction, then you rest, then this is a contraction. It was like what I had heard about but not experienced with my first birth.
Yeah.
So basically, I just stayed in the tub for 2 hours. I would like rest, experience a contraction. I used a lot of vocalization and like moaning. I remember Nick saying like, I've never seen you make those noises. It's very like animalistic and primal. But that really helped me. And then like around 8 or 9, so kind of like 2-3 hours in, they really, you know, I felt that the pain was really intensifying. And this was a point that started to get very hard for me because I spent a lot of time consuming media on birth about like pain-free birth and like elevating yourself mentally away from pain and how birth doesn't have to be painful. And then here I was experiencing like these very intensely painful contractions, and I just did not feel mentally capable of not having fear and not being scared of the pain. So that was really challenging headspace for me to be in. I got into a lot of like, I can't do this. Like, this is just too painful. Like, I need this to be over. I think some of that came from having this experience, this prior labor where I like was in so much pain and not progressing. So I was constantly afraid, like, oh my gosh, like, am I only 3 centimeters and it's this painful? And I also just think that I'm a kind of anxious person, and like I just got into this pain fear cycle that was very self-perpetuating. I also couldn't stop vomiting, which was kind of like just not a great element to add to the mix. And, the contractions the pain kind of started to combine with a lot of pressure, not like pushing pressure, but just like a intense, tense feeling. So my midwives, I think around 9 o'clock, they checked me and said, like, you're basically fully dilated. The baby's just really high up. We don't do this that often, but like, I thought if we broke your bag of water, she would come down. So they ended up doing that. And then within 30 minutes, although I will say until I saw like their charting, I thought I would have said it was like 4 hours. Within like 30 minutes, she started coming down. I think everyone was like doing something else. And suddenly I was like, she's coming. Wow. And I pushed her out in maybe 2 pushes in like 5 minutes. Wow. I had seen a lot of like birth memes on Instagram about, like this kind of position where you keep your knees in instead of splayed out for pushing. And so I think that really helped me just kind of like bring her down and push her down without resistance. And she did actually have a cord around her neck when she came out, which is probably why she was held so high. And I obviously like got to immediately after they unwrapped the cord, put her on my chest. And then we got out of the tub. So this had all been like, despite my experience of pain, it's like a pretty straightforward birth. The not so straightforward part happened after the birth. Unfortunately, I was holding Maeve for 20 minutes or so, and there was no like trying to push out the placenta. There was no placenta coming. They do bring Pitocin with them and an injection to try to help contract the uterus if this happens. So after about half an hour, they gave me a shot of Pitocin, and still nothing happened. We tried different positions. I had to give Maeve to Nick so that I could kind of like get on a birth stool and do all this squatting. I tried emptying my bladder. Nothing was happening. I think at the time in the beginning, I was like, oh, this is just like normal, waiting for the placenta. And then I kind of started to get the vibe that like, this wasn't normal. Like I could sense the anxiety of my midwives, which is never a good place to be in. And they, I think like an hour in, one of my midwives was like, I can try to go in manually and get it out. Which I think in my head, I thought it was just like sitting there and it was just going to be like a little scoop and pull it out. And I don't think I conceptualized that it was inside my uterus and she was going to put her entire hand in my uterus. So that was probably the worst thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. Like that level of pain was definitely traumatic at the time and shortly after. It's hard for me to comment on it now because I feel like I have complete amnesia. I just know that after she did that, I was like, oh my God, I'm traumatized. Like that was traumatic pain. So, I'm not that well versed in trauma. I don't know if that's a normal course or if it's just like a birth thing, but it's so fascinating to me that I could have such an intense experience. And now sit here talking to you, I'm like, oh, that happens, I guess. I don't know. It's very hard for me to like bring back those feelings kind of. So despite it being very painful, was not effective. She was not able to get the placenta. And so at this point, it had almost been an hour and a half of the placenta being retained, which is really high risk for infection and bleeding. And they were like, I think we're going to have to transfer to have the placenta removed, like to, give me more Pitocin and antibiotics and stuff, which was just like the most devastating thing I could have heard, because especially I think at any point, but especially during COVID, like it's not like I could bring the baby to the hospital with me. So it would have meant I was transferring and leaving my baby. And especially after like this really intense home birth, to just have to transfer would have been so hard. And so I said, like, can you just try? I think there was some theory that maybe my bladder was blocking the placenta. So I said, can you just try catheterizing me? And then if that doesn't work, we can go. So they were like, sure, we'll try that. They started to get the catheter ready. I asked to hold Maeve, who I had not held at this point since right after she was born. And as they were like opening the catheter packaging and setting up a sterile field, I just felt like this overwhelming desire to push, and the placenta came out. So I haven't like fully processed what happened in that scenario. You know, I love my home birth providers so much, and I understand that they're operating in a situation where they have to weigh, you know, they have to have a pretty low threshold for risk because they don't have certain tools with them, and they have to leave time for transfer.
Sure.
But I do feel pretty strongly that some of the like anxiety around getting the placenta out and doing all these interventions was causing the placenta to stay in. And if I had been just like, let's calm down and give me my baby and just let me have her for like 20 minutes, I think that I would have had that oxytocin and the placenta would have come out sooner. So, you know, I don't think that they necessarily did anything wrong within the framework that they have to work in. It was, in addition to your podcast, you know, I've listened to a lot of like more free birth, kind of unassisted birth stories. And it was the first time where I've been like, I kind of understand why people do that. Like, it's just impossible to escape some of the things that have to happen when you're receiving medical care that can sometimes really intervene in birth. And I don't think for this whole placenta drama, I don't think that the medical model, even the home birth medical model, served me. And I think that if I had just been able to like sit with my baby, it would have been a lot less of a stressful situation.
Yeah.
That's quite an incredible experience you just broke down for us. So I just want to acknowledge it. And, you know, I'm holding space for you, whatever it looks like for you to process that, if you need to more, or maybe it's just sharing it now, whatever that looks like. I just want to acknowledge that, because there was a lot right there to unpack. And so I feel very honored that you could share it with us. You know, that's a very sacred thing, and that's a very intense thing that you just described. And so I want to honor you and acknowledge that. And you make some really great points. And I think as you look back at it and as you kind of make sense, if that's the right way to put it, to make sense of parts of it, I think it was really beautiful. And, you know, it's a variation of normal, and it's a part of your experience. And that's a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So after she was born and everybody cleaned up and left, once again, what was it like now with the four of you as your little family?
Yeah, it was a really different experience. I think I had, I knew what like the haze and beauty of postpartum was for my first, and this time I was expecting to have that, except skip the hospital part.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, instead, we have a toddler going in and out, which was chaotic, lots of emotions there. Maeve really had some difficulty nursing. She was basically, this is like a long story, this is not for now, but she was basically like unable to suck for the first like 3 months of her life. So she really struggled with breastfeeding. She was really unable to use the bottle functionally. So, we worked with a lot of specialists to figure that out later on, but in that early postpartum phase, she was just a miserable baby, and I was very stressed out. And I don't think I didn't have this like beautiful snuggle with your infant postpartum phase that I had been so excited to have in the home birth setting. That was really hard for me. That felt like a loss for sure. I would basically just spend time like stuck in our bedroom with my toddler out in the living room with May screaming her head off all day long, trying to latch her. That was the early postpartum time. So yeah, I definitely feel that I missed out on like that benefit of home birth care, of just being able to go right into this kind of like restful, stay in bed with your baby and snuggle phase. So that's definitely a loss.
You mentioned early on in our conversation your practice and how, part of the idea behind the practice and you creating that was your experience. And so with your experience of breastfeeding and then the experiences that you've had with both your births, kind of piggybacking off something that Sarah said, just your ability to now help and support other moms through the different scenarios, the different variations of normal that they might be going through, and you being able to offer that support emotionally, and then having gone through it experientially. I think that's a wonderful thing that you chose to create this practice so that you can support these women and these moms the way that you do. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of things that happen, sounds a little like cheesy, but a lot of things that happen to us obviously happen so we can help other people or like create our life path. And for me, I came from a perspective of like breastfeeding is for everyone and it's really natural. And like most of the time, all the problems are kind of like made up and related to society. And then I had a unmedicated home birth with a healthy term infant, and breastfeeding was a nightmare. And we're very fortunate that we have a good breastfeeding relationship now, but that's just by a hair. We were very close to not being there. So it's really, really changed my perspective on navigating feeding for parents, and that breastfeeding is like for everyone, or that every baby can get there. So that's been quite educational and really, really humbling.
I appreciate you keeping it real too, Shira, just in terms of the transparency that you've had around aspects that, not everything is butterflies and rainbows, and to be able to identify authentically what certain things felt like and feel like for you, to say things like, that felt like a loss or that was traumatic, is really important. Acknowledge and be authentic about it. And I think that's going to serve someone right now so well who could use that perspective. And for those who feel like they might have to take parts of previous birth experiences and put them in this box that it was something that it wasn't. And so that's who I'm thinking of right now when I think of your story, someone who can relate to aspects that you shared and who can feel understood and can feel like they're not alone. And so that's very much what I'm taking out of this experience too, because there's a unlimited number of ways birth can look and feel. Yeah. And, there's the spectrum. And so we can recognize all of it. It doesn't have to just stay in this little box. And also that you can be real about it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a deterrent, or it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that someone's going to take and create fear around or add fear to. It's just, this is a story, and take from it, what resonates with you and what you can identify with.
Yeah, that really sums it up quite well. I mean, I think with both birth and breastfeeding, we have this tendency to try to like almost sell them to people as the right choice by making them butterflies and rainbows. And, the conversation around breastfeeding definitely has changed in recent years, but I still feel, at least the way that, I think your podcast does a very good job of showing all spectrums. But I still think there's some platforms out there and some voices about home birth that are like this is good because it's perfect and beautiful and there's no pain and it's all singing and dancing, and that's just not true. And that needs to be, we need to be more transparent about the spectrum of both those things.
Absolutely.
Here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being willing to be that transparent voice and sharing and just allowing us, Sarah and I, as well as everybody listening and watching, to, be a part of your experience, to be a part of your story and learn and take something from it. I'm extraordinarily grateful for you.
Thank you. I'm grateful for you both.
I'm going to put links, like I mentioned earlier, in the show notes for anyone who wants to connect with you, learn more about your story, what you do in your practice. And so Will you just drop that one more time for me in case they're listening? But then I'll also put the links if someone isn't able to access it right now.
Yeah, so my lactation practice is called Dyad Support, and the easiest way to find me is on Instagram. So that's at Dyad Support, DYAD Support, and the Instagram platform is trying to have some difficult conversations about breastfeeding. I've also been really inspired by you both, and I have like a bit of a pipe dream of making a podcast about feeding.
Nice.
If I can get my act together in 2022, that does what you guys do for birth, for feeding experiences, because I think they hold such a big part in people's parenting journeys. So keep an eye out for that if I can figure it out.
Definitely.
Hey, you got a resource in us.
Keep us posted.
Yeah, I may tap that.
Okay. Thank you so much again, Shira.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Quick note about the Doing It at Home podcast. Matthew and I are not doctors or medical professionals, and nothing we say should be taken as medical advice or opinion. If you have medical or health-related questions, please take them to a trained professional. We're here simply to entertain you with stories and conversations about pregnancy, birth, and parenthood.